afternoon, everyone. I think we'll just give it a minute before we start to make sure that everybody who wants to join has had a chance to do so. Before we start, I just wanted to say a massive thanks, first of all, to everybody here who's joined the webinar. It's heartening for me to see that I wasn't the only one who thought this was a topic which warranted a bit of explanation from someone much wiser than myself. Also, a massive thanks to you, Nelli. Nelli Shevchenko, for those of you who don't know her, is a solicitor with a law firm called Safar Shah. Correct me if I mispronounced that, Nelli. And where she is head of immigration. Nelli's been building this practice for about 5 years now, and has the benefit of herself having gone through the British immigration system, so she has first-hand knowledge of this. She advises both private and corporate clients on immigration, and has built a practice on helping businesses to make sure they can retain and attract international talent. So if you have any questions from a corporate perspective, she can also help you with that. Before we start, I just wanted to set out by way of housekeeping a few comments. We are recording this event, so unless you want to be called on camera, we encourage you to turn this off. If you have any questions throughout, you're more than welcome to type this into the chat, and we will take it up as we go along. Otherwise, there will be time set aside for questions at the end of the session. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to you, Nelli.
Thanks, Lisbeth. I would like to thank you for your kind introduction, and thank you, Danish-UK Association, for having me. Always great to join a good company. So we shall start with probably a few, again, housekeeping things. This is obviously a general representation of what the legal rules are. You may have specific facts and circumstances that are specific to you. We're happy to answer any questions, but obviously we advise everyone to seek their legal advice from an immigration lawyer to make sure that your situation is properly reviewed before making any legal actions yourself. So the plan for today's discussion is what we thought would be most important to remember now. I mean, at this stage, everybody is aware of what EU settlement scheme is. Most people probably already got the status, pre-settled or settled, and they're just thinking what is next in their immigration journey in the UK. And we're going to start with most of probably important for people to know is what is happening when their pre-settled status expires, because as you know, pre-settled status was granted to everyone for 5 years. So, and it is a time limited residence permit in the UK. So you need to actually do some active steps to make sure that you continue to live in the UK legally if you have a pre-settled status. And the most obvious step, and hopefully that's what UK visas and immigration, when they designed the system, was hoping that people will do, is they do upgrade their pre-settled status to a fully settled status, i.e. it's an indefinite leave to remain, it's for an indefinite period of time, and you can stay in the UK. I say it's indefinite, there are caveats to that, and we'll come back to it at a later stage. But at the end of the day, it's a status that you can retain for the length of your residence in the UK, and you don't need to do after that much. Many people may have received emails if you have a pre-settled status and you are with the database from the Home Office as holding an EU settled scheme status. You may have all received these emails a couple of weeks ago, a month, even now, time flies, that there might be some changes and the automatic grant of settled status to people who are eligible. And obviously, the automatic checks are going to be based on the government held information. What does that mean? That means most of the time is when you applied, you probably provide your national insurance number, because that's what they ask you as a first check, whether to grant you pre-settled status or settled status when you do an online application. And what they do is they run a database, and if they see the full 5 years national insurance payments regular, and there's no gaps more than 6 months in any 12-month period, they say, okay, right, you will automatically be granted a settled status. We know that these steps are good, and the check will run from 2024 at the beginning. We don't know the date yet. And we just know that the Home Office will notify people about the new status when that actually the upgrade happens. What I would say the most important thing is, do not rely on the Home Office to take care of your status. Apply if you haven't got the status yourself, even though you're sure that you should have got it. For example, if you've been working in the UK for 5 years, you're pretty sure you should get the automatic check correctly, but you haven't got an email, you don't see any updates from the Home Office on your status. Apply, because at the end of the day, it is your responsibility to make sure that your status has been retained in the UK. You know, the quicker you get the safety of the settled status and you don't have to worry about the expiry date, the best it is for you, and you know, you can sleep better at night. So do not rely on the Home Office, because the Home Office checks are again patchy. We all know the government systems IT are not perfect, so do not rely on the Home Office. Definitely apply. We're going to come back to the requirements for settled status. If you do want to apply, but you haven't actually got the national insurance payments in the last 5 years, you've been a student, for example, maybe you've been a stay-at-home mom or dad, maybe you have took a sabbatical leave. You know, there could be circumstances for any reason why you have a gap in your national insurance payment. It's not the end of the day, the end of the world that you don't have it. So there are alternative ways you can rely on documents to show the residence continuous in the UK. And we're going to come back to that in the later stage. Just going now through all the alternative options you can think of about what you can do if your pre-settled status runs out. You can obviously, there are limited options when the pre-settled status can be extended. And this is again coming back to another point of those automatic emails that were sent around earlier this year, that if you haven't had upgraded your settled status and your pre-settled status is expiring, what the Home Office has been doing, they've been granting people an automatic extension for 2 more years to just give them extra time if they haven't realized they need to upgrade to the settled status, or if they don't have any information on them yet, and the people just forgot that they need to upgrade the settled status to settled status from pre-settled. They give you extra 2-year extension. And it could be helpful for some people whose pre-settled status is expiring and they realize they actually cannot be eligible for settled status for any reasons, you know, including extensive absences, which we again will touch today, especially with COVID. And I can already see questions, people with COVID affection. Yes, COVID affected a lot of things, including people's residence, continuous residence. So there could be many ways why you need those extra 2 years on your pre-settled status to work up towards settled status. I would say the most important thing is that these 2 years extra will only be helpful if your 5 years continuous residence calculation started before the relevant date, which is for Brexit is December 2019. So the first year of your 5-year continuous residence has to start on the 30th of December, for example, 2019. That's the most important part, because the continuous residence has to start before the relevant date. There are other options in terms of.
Sorry, could you all just check if you're? That's better.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Elizabeth. There is obviously the option when your pre-settled status is expiring, you realize actually you left the UK, and at this stage you don't need to stay in the UK and work in the UK or reside in the UK long term, so you can just leave and continue coming as a visitor. That's absolutely fine. Most EU nationals have a right to be granted visitor entry upon border using your passport, so that's should be fine as well. There are final options and just alternative things. If you have in a situation where you have a pre-settled status, but you realize your continuous residence, that 5-year period that I talked about, that has to start from December 2019, that's actually is gone. You've been out of the UK since 2019 for way too long. You got yourself a pre-settled status for 5 years in, for example, 2019, right? And you thought, oh, well, whatever happens, you can come back within those 5 years, and you come back in 3 years' time, for example, 2013 now, or even on 2022, and you realize, oh, actually, UK, I want to stay here, but you cannot upgrade to settled status. What do you do? So in those scenarios, you do have to really look into alternative options for UK visa and immigration routes. So because you're now falling under UK immigration rules, there is no preferential treatment to EU nationals, so you have to go via regular route that everyone else going through. Depending on what you want to do, those options look completely different, and where you are in your life journey can be from student visas to skilled worker visas for working, innovative founders, and global talent visa for certain professionals. And you can have family route open to you via either being partnered to a British national or having a British child that you are a main carer for. There are obviously a lot of detail in all of these routes, so I'm not going to go into that because that's not the topic of our conversation today. But, those are there for you to explore if you need to. Coming to the settled status. So you think, okay, right, so I need to upgrade my pre-settled status to the settled status. What do you need to do for it? The main requirements are quite simple. You need to have a pre-settled status at this stage already, because, if you don't have any status at all, you want to get to settled status, you will be struggling to show, because the late applications have the deadline has passed long ago. You can still make late applications, but only if you have very serious reasons. So up until, I would say, this summer, they would accept applications that were late, for example, for reasons that you didn't know, you didn't realize. At this stage, from summer this year, there is no kind of excuse not to know what you need to do. The only reasons where you can be late if you had really serious medical family situations that compassionate circumstances, and you need to back it up with documents. Otherwise, the application is now no longer valid, i.e. you don't have a protection of applying for the application, waiting for the decision, and having a legal status in the UK. So we are in a much stricter situation for anything that is late. So you should have at this point a pre-settled status if you are thinking of upgrading to fully settled status. And what do you need to show for it? Continuous 5 years residence, which we mentioned. It has to start at least one day before 31st of December. But the 5 years can count from any point. So it doesn't have to be the 5 years from since you got your pre-settled status, for example, if you started living in the UK before. So if you got your pre-settled status when you are only 2 years residence in the UK, and you got your pre-settled status, you don't need to wait for 5 years when you got the pre-settled status. So you can count any time before, as long as you can show that you've been continuously living in the UK since then. If you're a family member, some people can be family members of EU nationals, then we're talking about residence plus evidence of relationship, right? So we're talking about the relationship with the EU nationals, and that 5 years is becoming relevant for your relationship. Residence can be shown in different ways, and I've included here at the bottom examples of documents showing residence. There is a very comprehensive guidance from the UK government website that shows you all the documents that you can provide. And I would say the most of the documents, if we are discounting the national insurance number, right, and all the contributions, the documents for residence would be grouped in two things: the long-term documents and the short-term documents. Long-term documents are things that cover a year. So let's say your council tax will be covering the year, right? So that year is covered, or your annual bank statement, right? So, in order to prove physical residence in the UK, what do you need to show? Most of people spend money, even if they don't work, even if they don't actually contribute to taxes, they actually spend money by living in the UK. So the bank account is actually one of the top things that we use. And it does sound a lot if you think about 5 years worth of bank accounts. Yes, it is a lot. We saw a lot of documents piles like this. This is usually the most kind of efficient way, because if you can have an annual statement for your bank account for the last like 5 years, that's easy way to show your 5 years residence. The long term, yes, sorry.
Can I? Sorry, I was just going to say, Jade has raised a question which I thought might be useful to take up now, which is how early in advance can you send your application if you know that you're coming up to the 5-year anniversary from when you arrived in the UK in half a year's time? Would you be able to send the application now, so that it's sort of over and done with, or do you need to wait until the
Yeah, so that's a very good question. So you will need to be resident at the point of application for 5 years. So that's when the 5 years actually start. The moment you go online and click submit to that application, that's your date when you go backwards 5 years. So at the point when you actually apply, you need by that point have the 5 years behind you. So yes, that is very important point. You can't kind of like wait and apply and then wait for them to decide.
And then I can see there's a follow-up question straight away. Does that mean that you'd have to let your status expire before applying?
No, so you need to apply before you expire. And that's kind of very important. So, this pre-settled status was granted for 5 years for that reason, is that it gives you those 5 years to stay in the UK and then apply before the expiry of it, and then you have 5 years.
But I suppose it means, sorry, just so that I'm clear, it means that if you arrived in the UK, say on the 20th of December 2020, made your application for pre-settled status the following day, you'd have a very narrow window 5 years later to make the application.
So the 5 years is usually granted from the date of the decision, not the date when you arrive. And you can count the time when you arrive. So let's say you arrived in December 2020, right? And then you applied immediately, and then you got your status in January. I mean, that was a massive backlog at the time for the application, so you wouldn't get it quite quickly. So you probably got it like in January 2020. That means you have from January 2020 to January 2025 to apply, right? But you can count the date from the 5-year period from the December when you arrived. So the first day that you arrived is your start date for the 5 years. So if you apply in December 2024, way before your expiry date of January 2025, that's fine. So you can apply early. You don't have to wait for the expiry date of the pre-settled status to apply. You can apply early if that's the question, as long as you know from the date of your first entry to the UK, you have 5 years.
And I suppose the same goes in terms of collating your evidence as to if you don't have the NI contributions throughout that period, you can start bringing all that together and bundle it all up so it's nice and ready to go as soon as you reach the day.
Exactly. And also what you can consider, collecting if you have any other residence document that you need to request, say from DWP or any other governmental organization, or if you need to go and collect P60s or something old or P45s from the old employers, or again, coming back to bank statements, you can send a letter to the bank and then wait for your bank statements to arrive, and then you have them ready to go by the time you apply. it could be mortgage statements, it could be student letters. So for example, letter from the university confirming that you've been studying, your degree certificate with a transcript. If you're a full-time student, for example, this transcript will show that you've been studying full-time for X amount of years, right? So that covers your residence in the UK for that period of time again. If you're, say, stay-at-home mom or dad, you just been taking care of your child, you don't really have much in terms of documents. You would have probably documents from the hospital showing that you are the parent taking care of the child. You would have any communication from the school confirming that you are the relevant person for the child. Again, you can ask for school to get letters. I mean, you can be inventive in terms of what documents. The most important thing to remember is that you are proving physical residence in the UK. So letter from a friend saying that, yes, I know you lived here, it's not really showing your physical residence in the UK, and it's not authoritative enough to prove that. But you can go and ask employers, universities, even if you are volunteering and doing an internships or anything like unpaid jobs. That's also, you can go and ask for the letter if you haven't been paid, for example, in an internship. You can go and ask for that letter confirming you've been here in the UK. So that's in terms of kind of residence. And remember that you need to show the residence in the UK for every 6 months out of 12 months period. So you don't have to show every single month of those 5 years. You need to show 6 months out of every 12 months, 5 years in a row. There is a very good calculator. If you had absences in the UK, there is a 3 million. It's a very good charity. They helped lobbying for a lot of EU nationals' rights with the government, but they also do a lot of free information and documents for EU nationals who are in the UK on how to regulate their status. So they have a very nice calculator for for example, if you had absences and you're not sure whether that 6-month rolling period, how does it work in the 12-month period, 5 years in a row, you've been in and out and you're not sure, use that calculator. That's actually very helpful and, well done. It helps you to see where you have gaps, for example, and where you might need to rely on the exemptions from breaks in the continuous residence, which we're going to come back to next in our topic. So the thing here about yes, that's actually another important point, is that if you had 5 years in the UK before, say, Brexit, but then you left the UK and got your pre-settled status, right? And then you left the UK for some reason for 2-3 years. You can go back to those 5 years back as long as you haven't left the UK for another 5-year period. So you haven't lost your sort of settled status. So you can be very creative. If you've been in the UK before, way back before, obviously you have to remember that shouldn't be way too far because to kind of nivellate completely your status, but you can rely on old residences. Again, you can be creative, can go and ask people or lawyers or go and check with 3 million calculator. They usually have a good resources for that kind of stuff, where you can find your block of 5 years in a row. Breaks in continuous residence. So you have your 5 years, right? But you left the UK for some reason, and
Sorry, Nelly,
yeah.
to interrupt again. I can just see that we have a question from Morton saying, what if I had pre-settled status back in 2021, left to go back to Denmark to study? Are you then able to come back now and work on that?
So the main question, how long you've been out. So you can lose pre-settled status if you are out of the UK for more than 2 years. So if you haven't stood a foot on the UK soil for 2 years since you've left in 2021, then you lost potentially your pre-settled status, and that will show up. But yes, as long as it's less than 2 years, that's fine. You can come back. Your status is still will be showing when you're gonna, prove your right to work in the UK to your potential employer. They'll ask for the code. They go online. They still see your pre-settled status to be valid with the right to work in UK. That's absolutely fine. Yes, you can come back and continue residing here. Question will be whether you will be able to upgrade to pre-settled status. That's another point to remember, is that pre-settled from pre-settled to settled, because pre-settled is obviously has a expiry date. But yeah, short-term answer is yes, that's fine. You have a pre-settled status, it's still valid, then you can come and work. It gives you a right to work in the UK. So yes, breaks in continuous residence. So you've identified that you have a 5 years residence starting in December 2020, but you have a gap. So you can have a gap of more than 6 months in any 12-month period for these reasons that are listed on the screen now. And this is usually, giving birth, being ill, studying or training, or sent to work abroad by your employer, for example, on a secondment. It could be one period of less than 12 months, more than 6 months, but less than 12 months. That's those reasons. Then there are others that are, I would say, more related to military service, and anything else related to the government, armed forces, marine, crown service, etc. That could be for any length of time, because that is usually authorized by the UK government, or you being a family member of someone who actually did that and have to go abroad. That also is allowed in terms of breaks of continuous residence. Very specific cases, but again, worth mentioning. And then there is another one which is now added, which is coronavirus, the COVID-19 absences, which we'll see allows you a little bit more flexibility than just one absence in 5 years of less than 12 months. So COVID absences has a separate guidance. As always, it's not easy. Government likes to make it complicated. So you have obviously breaks in continuous residence, which is one separate rule, and then you have a separate guidance for the COVID absences restrictions, how that affects your continuous residence. So we have another absence up to 12 months for an important reason. Let's say I mentioned here, like giving birth, being seriously ill, studying, training, and working abroad for employer. But what if none of that applies? What if you were just feeling at the time comfortable for going out of the UK because of the coronavirus restriction? Everybody remembers we couldn't go for a run. We had to sit in the UK in home, couldn't sit with another person on the bench. Even you were not allowed to sit on the bench. You had silly restrictions, and now it seems a bit absurd, but at the time they were quite serious, and there was a lot of pressure on people staying at home, whereas if they are abroad, they might feel that they feel much more comfortable life, and they want to stay abroad. So you stayed due to coronavirus abroad, and that is actually quite broad. If you see, you don't have to, you can be ill, you could have been ill with coronavirus, you could have been self-isolating or shielding, with the local public health guidances on coronavirus. Again, point about local public health guidance, it doesn't have to be only that UK guidance made you self-isolate. It can be your local country had a much stricter, for example, rules. We all remember UK was a bit late on that wave of closing down the borders and all of that stuff. So, there could be different local government rules. It could be someone you've been taking care of, a family member, or there was travel disruption. Remember that there was like everybody was flying to the UK, and then suddenly nobody flying was out of the UK. It was changing every day, so you don't know what happened at the time. So you have to go and check what was the travel disruption, for example, if there were any rules. You could have been advised by universities in the UK actually did advise people who are especially our international students to stay at home and don't come and do the remote studying. So again, that is also allowed because you were encouraged by your university not to return. And then the same goes for the final rule, is where you've been absent from the UK for another reason relating to coronavirus. And I highlighted here in italics because it makes a big difference, because we are talking still about absence up to 12 months. Remember, this is the final reason, which is very broad. Essentially, it means You just decided yourself that it is safer for you to stay outside the UK. And that is fine up to 12 months. But if we go next one, what if you've been out of the UK for more than 12 months? Would the reasons still be the same? Most of them are, apart from that final one. So you have to have a little bit of more kind of objective reasons for you to stay out of the UK if you've been more than 12 months out. So up to 12 months, you can basically decide yourself that because of the fewer coronavirus restrictions elsewhere, you prefer to stay and work abroad from home, overseas. But if you have been out of the UK more than 12 months, you can't rely on that reason. They have to be very strict. You can also combine reasons. Remember, we talked at the beginning of the one absence up to 12 months and include pregnancy, childbirth, serious illness, study, etc. But if you, on top of it, you plan to be out the UK for less than 12 months, but then on top you had COVID. You've been pregnant, you thought, okay, I'm allowed one absence over 6 months, but up to 12. I'm pregnant at the moment, I'll give birth to a child and then I'll return, and that will be my exemption from the break in continuous residence. But then coronavirus happened, and that resulted in you being outside the UK for more than 12 months. That is allowed in combination. So you can have COVID reasons plus any of the serious important reasons that we discussed, like childbirth, illness, study, vocational training, overseas posting. And I know this is very complicated and mind-boggling, but yes, this is unfortunately how it's written. It's not the most easy read, but the most important thing to remember is that you can combine essentially regular reasons with COVID reasons for more than 12 months. Another thing to remember is that you can only have one absence more than 12 months. You cannot have two absences more than 12 months. You can have two absences up to 12 months, but only one of them can be over 12 months. So you can have 6 months or 7 months out because you have been ill or had a vocational training, and then you can have another absence because you had been out because of the coronavirus. Could be over 12 months if it's for a serious reason listed. You have to really look at your circumstances. It really depends. Another thing to remember is that if you do have any absence more than 12 months, that actually pauses your continuous residence. So if you have been out of more than 12 months, you will be paused from the point when your 12 months absence from the UK started, and it will resume only when you return to the UK. So you may find yourself in the situation where that 2-year, the automatic extension for pre-settled status may be helpful in this situation, because pre-settled status was given once for 5 years, right? But you've been out somewhere in between for more than 12 months, which means you paused your continuous residence, so you are short for that over a year. So that extra 2 years that they've given you now could be helpful in this scenario to get you to the full 5 years continuous qualifying period of 5 years, despite the fact that you had a gap in between. So really, really complex stuff, but you really have to look at why you were. The main reason is why you've been away. Collect the documents of why you've been away and count how long was it for.
If I can just interrupt here, I can see that Jade has asked another question. You mentioned military service for the UK. What if you are called to do military service in your home country? By way of example, Finland has mandatory military service.
That's a good question, actually. I think what I don't think I've seen the foreign military service to be used. Unfortunately, in the regular breaks of continuous residence, it's only the UK one. So you would have to still make sure that you're not out more than 6 months. And I think that's unfortunate. Yes, I think that I will double check that point, but didn't see it at all. Only UK military service is mentioned. I'll double check that just to make give a 100% answer, but unfortunately, I don't think so. From top of my head and looking just at these notes because I didn't take out anything in the reasons. Yes, this is the stuff about breaks and continuous residence. In terms of evidences for the breaks, they have to be very much like, you have to show that if you are talking about COVID and up to 12 months, you can just say that you could just left because you wanted to, and that's absolutely fine. If it's more than 12 months and it's any other reasons here, you might have to look for like if it's an illness, documents, medical documents. If it's a pregnancy, childbirth, the same. If it's a study, vocational training, again, overseas posting, you need to show evidences of that. Not just to say that this is what it was. You need to might get a letter or something from the time, plus COVID restrictions. The final kind of topic, I know, Lisbeth, you are also very interested in this one, is you got your settled status, right? Happy days, that's all great. Can you just continue living with it, or should you consider British citizenship? I mean, it's a personal topic, but you can, after 12 months of holding a settled status, and this is actually here important, actually, is the 12 months have to pass since you've been granted settled status. It's not the same as, when we talked about 5 years residence for settled status that can run and start before you've been granted pre-settled status. This is actually a very much a strict 12 months rule from the date you've been granted your settled status. You can't apply before. There are certain exceptions when you can apply earlier. For example, if you are want to, for example, participate in Olympics as a British citizen for the team. It happened for me. We had a client the child who really was invited to the Olympics, and she was short half a year for British citizenship after being granted settled status. And she was granted British citizenship just before the Olympics. It's a very unique case, but you could have exemptions, but otherwise it's a very much a strict 12 months. And why would you consider that? There are certain perks you get from it. First of all, UK allows dual nationality, so it's not a problem if you have any other nationality, but do check if your country allows dual nationality, because it's okay for UK to say, yes, do what you want. You do not want to retrospectively, accidentally lose your other second nationality, whatever that may be. There might be steps where you need to take, for example, to retain that status. For example, in South Africa, you can get a certificate of retention of nationality before applying for British citizenship that allows you to continue to be both UK and South African national. So, just need to investigate that before jumping in the ship and finding yourself in unexpected circumstances. Why would you again consider it? It does give you a right to live in the UK forever. With the settled status, remember I said it's indefinite. It's not really indefinite if we talk about length of time you can be out of the UK. So if you leave UK for 5 years with a settled status, you will not, you might lose it. So you might find yourself in 6 years' time returning and you lost it, and at the border they say, well, no, actually rescind your settled status and you can no longer stay here. Things happen. So with a British passport and British citizenship, you will not have that situation. You can be permanently settled and you can't lose it, even if you decide to retire to another country, where it's sunny and nicer. The same goes with it, and the next point is probably the same as above. There's no restrictions on traveling abroad and staying overseas. If you want to go for a secondment to Dubai and live tax-free life for several years, you can do that, but British passport is always there for you to return. Some people do that. Just an example. So it doesn't, you don't have to have a clock of how long you've been out of the UK to be able to sustain your settled status in the UK. So that's, I guess, is a plus. You get full civic rights. You can vote. Some people find it fun. You can also stand to public office, for example, if you want to contribute more to the local community as a council or even as MP. So, British passport, that gives you the full civic rights. The final one might be helpful for people who want to have children and still considering this. For example, with the British citizenship, if you have children and they are born abroad, they will be automatically British by virtue of your nationality. So they will become British by descent. Whereas with the settled status, only if your children have been born in the UK, they will be automatically British because you have a settled status in the UK, and the British nationality rules work in the way that if your child is born in the UK whilst you're settled, they are automatically British. It's not the same as for any other children abroad. So say you have a settled status, but you given birth in Denmark, they will not be automatically British. So you have to weigh that in. So that's all the pros. Lisbeth, do you want to run the questions before I go to next?
There's been a few questions coming up. So Sam has asked, what's the time restrictions for traveling on a settled status? So how long can you leave the country?
So as I said, it's 5 years. It's 5 years maximum. So you can leave the UK for 1, 2, 3 years and come back. As long as you set foot in the UK within the 5-year period, you can sustain your settled status.
So does that mean you can transfer through in an airport and?
Yeah.
Or do you have to?
Well, no, you have to get out. Because the transit will not count as you being landing actually on the UK soil, right? Because international rules work that we all know that. Was it Terminal film, right? When he was stuck in the terminal forever. He wasn't actually technically on the US soil, right? So that's why he was able to be there. And it's the same here. So that if you do land in Heathrow and you just jump on the next plane to US, for example, going through, that actually doesn't count as you being in the UK because you haven't gone out to UK soil. So you will need to physically go out. And these days the checks are automatic. So you will scan your passport through e-gates. That will register on your status because that's your passport and status linked together, and you will register that you've been in the UK. Even if you leave the next day, that's absolutely fine. You sustained your settled status. So 5 years is the maximum of time.
Another question that was raised was in terms of benefits. Morten asked if you would still be able to receive pension from the UK if you don't have UK citizenship.
Yes, so you can. I mean, obviously, there are separate rules of whether you will be eligible for the state pension, for example, because you have to accrue certain time. And I'm not going to go into that because that's definitely outside my expertise. But you don't have to have a UK citizenship to get the benefits. No. Settled status is, in terms of public access to public funds, is exactly the same as British citizenship. So the public funds right is the same.
I think that turns on NI contributions as well. You have to pay national insurance for a number of years before you are entitled to pension.
Yes.
I don't know if we're turning to this now.
I think that's exactly where we're turning. I see the next question about the cost, and that is one of the main disadvantages of here I'm listing on the slide. So it is not cheapest application, and the fees have risen recently on 4th of October. So we're now looking at £1,351 for application for British citizenship, and it is not the same as passport. So it's a 2-step process in the UK for anyone who wants to know about it and haven't done this yet. So you first apply for your British citizenship, and as part of that, you will even have to go to an appointment. Some of them are paid as well. You can pay 200, 300, 500 pounds for an appointment biometrics. So you can get free ones, by the way, but you have to wait like a month or 2 for them because the slots are going out quite fast. But the mandatory cost of visa application, yes, it is a hefty fee. And then before you apply for British citizenship, you have to actually go through requirements, which is going to be on the next stage. But one of the kind of disadvantage is that for settled status, you don't really need to prove anything about your knowledge of English, whether you know UK and how assimilated you are into the society and all of that stuff. You just show the residence. That's the main rule for the settled status, what you need to show. Whereas with a citizenship, you have to show knowledge of English at level B1 and life in the UK test, which is the knowledge about UK. If you have any knowledge about what life in the UK test, it's like a pub quiz but worse, like a very outdated pub quiz. It's very easy, I would say. I don't know anyone who has failed it from my clients, but then I don't want to put any extra pressure on people, thinking that it's very hard, like yeah, you'll be the first one to fail. You have to prepare for it. That's a given, because the questions could range from very simple ones of what is the capital of Scotland to how many people are in National Assembly in Northern Ireland members, for example. You get some random questions. The pass rate is not very high. It's like 60 or I think 75%. So the requirement to pass the test English and life in the UK is the main disadvantage. If you're, for example, struggling with English, there are exemptions from requirements, and most of the two main ones is age. So if you're a lucky, happy person of living to 65 years old and over, then you are exempt from English language and life in the UK test. And then the second thing is that if you have a long-term physical or mental condition, for that one, you will need a medical letter result in a certain form. So you can't just say that I can't pass the test and that's your self-assessed condition. You have to have a medical professional actually examining you and providing the testification to the Home Office to apply for an exemption. The final disadvantage, I don't know how much of a disadvantage it is, it's a swearing an oath or affirmation of allegiance to the Crown and pledge its support to the UK as part of citizenship ceremony. It sounds very English and very, how do I say it, very ceremonial, but it is a British citizenship ceremony where you become British. Could be a fun event for some people. Some people find it really fun. Some people find it a bit too much, and swearing your allegiance to Charles might sound very scary and weird. So these are the main, I would say, disadvantages. Before I kind of do you want to run through the questions?
Yes, I was going to say, Susanna has asked if you know approximately what the costs of the tests are.
Yeah, so life in the UK test, I think it's £50 from top of my head, so it's not very expensive. I'll double check this now on the screen. English test, an English language actually, something maybe, yes, it's exactly £50 for life in the UK test. English language is actually not necessarily to be a test. Actually, for example, you're a student who studied in the UK and you have a UK degree, that also is acceptable, so you don't need to do the test. Or you have studied your GCSEs, A levels in the UK, in English again, it will be there, so you should be able to rely on that for your English language. The same goes if you have actually a foreign degree that was taught fully in English. You may have to get an extra certification called from the company called UK Actis. The cost is about £150-200 for that certification, and the life and the English language test in the UK, the fees range depending on the providers. So it could be between, I think, again, £150 to £200 per test, depending on location, time, etc.
What about professional qualifications in the UK? Would that
Yes,
go this
so
as well?
the professional qualifications is a bit tricky. The main reason is that I don't think most of them are. So, for example, if you have like a postgraduate or any other degree that was like part of a professional qualification, I don't think they would actually be acceptable for the British citizenship. I have a memory from top of my head that that was not applicable. Let me just double check, but I could check that again on offline and check it later. But that's a tricky one because it has to be a degree taught kind of qualification. So let's say academic qualifications for a lawyer or an accountant, they require you to study in the UK for a degree. It's a postgraduate degree. Then that would be acceptable. You can have that postgraduate degree, the same as degree that I mentioned earlier, any degree. But if it's a professional qualification that doesn't require a degree, then no.
Okay. The other thing I meant to ask is these tests, how far in advance of your application can you take them? Is there do they expire, or can you take them, sit them?
Yeah. So life in the UK test is an easy one that doesn't expire at all. So you can take it now if you want and keep it for the, until you apply. So that's absolutely fine. English language test, if that's what you need to do for the English language test, it does expire. It's only valid for 2 years. So yeah, don't take it too early.
Just going back slightly, Martin has asked, I suspect very few would have had the ability to have had settled status and left the UK for 5 years, but have the Home Office expressed that the timer of 5 years is linked to? Is it linked to the passport?
Yeah, I mean, this is the great question. And I would say it's a big mystery because UK immigration, obviously, as all of you know, doesn't have an exit check, right? It's usually within the EU, you have exit and entry checks. Whereas with the UK, it's a very much like free reign. You can go and nobody knows, supposedly, that you left. And yes, the way they check is actually related to your passport. So if you're, for example, one of the EU nationals, especially we've done this a lot with, British nationality applications, as a EU national, you didn't get a stamp. So many people didn't know how much they traveled. So when trying to get the 5-year travel schedule for the past 5 years for British citizenship to show that you haven't been out of the UK for a certain period of time might be tricky. So, and you will find that you can request the Home Office all the data about your exit and entries from the UK. They are based on your nationality, name, and passport number. And then also that is linked together. People ask me, what if I have several passports, several nationalities? How do they put me together in this situation? Your biometric data is still the same on all of those passports. So they conjunct them together based on that. So you will be surprised, but the Home Office does collect all the data from the air carriers, and air carriers are obliged to provide all the data about all the flights that you've booked. So you will have a flight out and in of the UK port of entries for every single person, and they hold that data for, I think, 20 years at least, as from top of my head. That's how far you can go. But I think there is a special rules to go that far. But so you can request them from the Home Office. So there's something called subject access request, and if you Google subject access request Home Office, you can find basically an entry data that Home Office holds for you. As you'll see, if you do get the request and get a response, not all of it is accurate. So at the end of the day, it will be for you to show that you have been in the UK on X amount of days on that period of time. So the 5-year period, I suspect, will be linked through the passport and through your details. And then again, don't take out, discard the question in the border. If you haven't been in the UK for a long time and you happen to, go through e-gate, you see people trying to go through e-gate and they are sent over to those unlucky people that's sent over to the immigration officer to go to the long queue. that's when again you can be triggered. So there are certain rules on those e-gates that trigger you to go to the immigration officer, and one of them, if you've been out of the UK for a long time and you have a status linked on on your passport. So you go in and speak and they say, so when was the last time you've been in the UK? How long have you been out? And they put that on the record. And you can't obviously lie. I think we're done with the questions.
Yes.
All right, so this is where I was talking about the absences from the UK. So if you decide, fine, those disadvantages of the British citizenship doesn't sound too bad. What do you need to show? Again, residence in the UK 5 years before the application. Unlike settled status, again, it has to be before the application, so you can't rely on the previous 5 years going back. If you are a happy spouse of a British national, you have a discount and you need to only show 3 years. It goes back to historical rules on the spouse's visas. It's not relevant anymore, but the nationality law still holds that this like disparity between married and not married people to British nationals. You need to hold your settled status for 12 months. Again, we talked about this. And then the next thing is absences from the UK. They are quite strict, much stricter than the settled status absences you'll see, especially on the last 12 months, where you shouldn't be out of the UK more than 90 days. And then the total 5 years is 450 days, or 270 for 3 years. There is some wiggle room on this. So don't be scared if you are off by, I don't know, 470 days and 100 days in the last 12 months. There are certain rules where you can ask for discretion. Most of them are relating if you have a family in the UK, but you travel a lot for work, working for a multinational company, if you had compassionate circumstances. So you need to show still the ties to the UK. And the more obviously discretion you ask, the more ties you need to show to the UK. So I would say if you don't have much ties to the UK, try not to ask for discretion. Because this is where people ask, well, what about my tax status? Is that relevant? Yes, it will be relevant if you are asking for discretion on absences of more than, for let's say, 600 days in the last 5 years. They'll start to look, oh, where is your tax status? Are you trying to say that you are non-domicile? They'll start digging deeper, and that's when you get a bit of into trouble. For various reasons. So if you don't want to have anyone to look into any of your position, just make sure that you ask for as little discretion as possible. So just to give you a ballpark, you can ask for discretion for 470, 480 days in the last 5 years quite easily, and up to 100 days in the last 12 months. Everything more, you will need to show more ties to the UK. And then, the same thing we talked about, English language, life in the UK test, application fee. Be of good character. That's a random one. Yeah, so it's a very wide one. I would say if you don't have any previous history of any convictions or fines or, a whole lot of parking tickets even, then you will be fine. But at the end of the day, you just have to declare and show that you are of good character. It's a public concern on the and it just gives Home Office a right to refuse if for any reason they don't think you are good character. Again, that's a very wide, but remember, it's mainly to protect the public and defense, etc. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because you can have the whole training of what a good character means, but if you're a good person, you'll be fine and don't get into trouble. That's all I have time for, I'm afraid, today.
I can see that there is one question sitting on the chat, which goes to I'm not sure if that is when one is asking if you'd be able to bring in a person from Denmark to work for a UK company for a limited time of 8 months. I assume that you would be able to, but not under the EU rules?
Yeah, that's all. That's gonna be UK immigration rules. So yeah, that's possible, but you will need to apply for a visa. So, and it's gonna be a work visa likely. So it's a completely different topic. So yes, the answer is yes, but you have to do something for it, including license for the company and visa for the national. I see Gunnar is asking me if I will be able to provide the slides. Yes, I definitely can. And yes, the presentation will be shared, Olga. So, and the recording as well, right, Lisbeth?
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. So.
I don't know if there are any further questions. If anybody don't want to type it into the chat, you're welcome to come on now and ask in person too. I can see Anita has a question. Are you able
Yes,
to
sorry,
unmute
I
yourself?
couldn't have on the sorry, I couldn't have in the chat because I'm on the phone. So I just want to be very clear in regards to pre-settle. I do have settled myself, but it's just I want to make sure I understand the process. So if you have a pre-settled status and you, for example, have lived abroad, and now you have got the 2 years extensions as the government granted. Can you then come back now and then start the other 5 years to start again to build up 5 years, or is this just gone? What happens then?
Yeah, so as I said, the most important thing to remember is for settled status, your continuous 5 years resident has to start before the relevant date, which was December 2020 when Brexit happened. So you have to, your first day has to be then. So you can't start accruing those 5 years now, for example, even if you include the 2 years extension, unless your long-term residence, continuous residence started before the relevant date. So yes, it's a one-off, unfortunately, extension. We don't know whether how government will change their mind, but at the moment, this is the rules. You kind of lost the boat, your chance if you have been out of the UK and you can't claim exemption for any of those breaks and continuous residence reasons that I explained.
So that, yeah, so to just to understand then, because I guess it would be the same for people with settled status if they've been out more than 5 years, which none of us could have at this stage, but in the future, because you have to come back within 5 years, isn't it? You always have to come back to show that you're still here. So I guess if we by any means lose that, as you say, things can happen, we can have another pandemic, something like that. Do we then have to, of course, I'm thinking about now because in the future we don't know what will happen. But for example, if we now, for people with pre-settled status, have been abroad, or people with settled status who has been abroad and can no longer make up the years that's meant to be made up, it's always 5 years, isn't it, both for pre and for current settled status. Does that mean that they now have to reapply for a visa to come back, or what is the process? That's what I don't understand.
So there are two things to bear in mind here. So we're talking about pre-settled status and requirement to apply upgraded to settled status. So that's the 5 years that I talked about that has to be before the relevant date, right? So that's
Right.
you have those 5 years to upgrade to settled status. As long as you have your pre-settled status and you haven't left the UK for more than 2 years, then you have it pre-settled status as long as it lasts. So that's a one-off visa that gets you. Once it expires and you haven't upgraded to settled status, you just lose it and then you go back to UK immigration rules. If you have a settled status, let's say you have a settled status at the moment now, and you leave the UK for 5 years, you lose your settled status, but you can apply for something called UK returning resident visa. It's a completely set of rules, different set of rules that you need to show that you had held continuous like ties to the UK and you kind of at some point plan to return, and that gives you a returning resident visa, which is for a certain period of time, by which where you can basically reclaim your long-term residence in the UK. And that's a completely different process, different set of rules. So probably the easiest answer is yes, you fall back onto existing UK immigration rules if you lose your status, either it's pre-settled or settled.
Perfect. Thank you. You answered my question now. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, we have another question. Sorry, I can't see the name of you, but there's another person who's raised their hand, so if you could unmute yourself. Maybe not.
It's the same
Helle,
person, Anita. So
I see.
just ignore.
I see. Helle has asked if you have to apply for settled status first before applying for British citizenship.
Yes, you do. Yeah, in any way, the main prerequisite point is that you have to hold settled status, even if you're married to a British citizen. So if you're married to a British citizen, you don't need to wait those 12 months that I was talking about. So, but you still need to get settled status before. So you get your settled status and then you immediately apply for British citizenship. You don't need to wait 12 months. That's your advantage.
Okay, I think that concludes all the questions, unless anybody feels like they're missing out. Otherwise, I will say again, massive thank you to you, Nelly. It's been incredibly helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, you have my contact details, and in the slides, if afterwards somebody comes up with a question or didn't want to share it publicly. And yes, I'll thank the Danish-UK Association for having me. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, it's been an absolute pleasure.
And yes,
so just before everybody jots off, I just wanted to say that we have a few upcoming events, which we hope to see as many as possible at. We have a Halloween party at Mikkeller Bar on the 31st of October. And we have a Smørrebrød gin tasting and distillery tour with Jensen Gin on the 15th of November. A curry night celebrating Diwali on the 23rd of November with a firm of accountants. Gunnar, you'll have to remind me of the name, which escapes me, but it might be relevant to people here tonight too, because they I know they work with issues relating to domicile and tax issues, which could be.
That's correct. It's a professional service firms of accountant UHY Hacker Young, but anyone are welcome to sign up.
Absolutely. And then yes, we have a Christmas lunch coming up on the 8th of December. So yeah, hope to see everyone very soon. Have a nice evening.